On a muggy August morning in 1847, something happened at a slave auction in Charleston, South Carolina, that would haunt generations. A single bid, just $5, set off one of the strangest, most terrifying mysteries in Southern history. Whispers of a woman who could not be described the same way twice. A planter's death that no one could explain. And records that vanished from every county office where they once existed. This is the story of number 39, the woman who cursed Magnolia Bend Plantation, and every man who tried to own her. If you love dark mysteries pulled from America's hidden past, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and ring that bell. Let us know where you're listening from, we read every comment. Now, let's go back to Charleston, the summer of 1847. Part 1, The Auction at Ryan's Mart. By the mid-1840s, Ryan's Mart was the beating heart of Charleston's slave trade. Every week, men, women, and children were brought into its brick courtyard, displayed like livestock before planters and traders. The place smelled of salt, sweat, and fear. The kind of smell that never quite left your clothes. The building itself was plain, whitewashed walls, wooden benches, and a raised platform where human lives were priced and sold. By August, the air felt heavy enough to drink, and flies swarmed the courtyard, drawn by heat and misery. Among the crowd that morning stood Samuel Rutledge, a 43-year-old rice planter from Colton County. He owned a plantation called Magnolia Bend, 800 acres along the Edisto River. It was not a great estate by Carolina standards, but it had been in his family for 3 generations. Samuel had lost his wife, Catherine, to yellow fever 3 years earlier, leaving him 2 daughters, Louisa, 17, and Margaret, 14. He was known as a stern man, precise, distant, and obsessed with numbers. His ledger books were always balanced, even if his life wasn't. But by that summer, the plantation was in trouble. Heavy rains had ruined the last rice crop, his overseer was overworked, and 2 field hands had died that spring. Samuel needed labor, cheap labor, or Magnolia Bend would fall behind. He arrived at Ryan's Mart that morning with exactly $50 in his pocket. That was barely enough to buy a half-fit worker, maybe an older man or a woman past her prime. He stood quietly in the shade, fanning himself with his hat as the auctioneer, Thomas Gadsden, began the day's sales. A blacksmith sold for $1,400. A mother and child went for $900. 2 young boys fetched $1,600 together. The bids came fast, the rhythm practiced, the crowd hungry for bargains. Samuel waited, patient and practical. He knew he couldn't compete for the strong or skilled. He was watching for the forgotten ones, the people no one else wanted. Then, just after noon, Gadsden called out a new number. Lot 39, bring her forward. 2 attendants led a woman onto the platform. Her head was completely covered by a burlap sack, tied loosely at her neck. She didn't move, didn't speak. The crowd fell strangely quiet. Even the flies seemed to pause. Gadsden cleared his throat. This woman, he said, is 24 years of age. Strong constitution, no illness known. She has been kept separate, due to her appearance. Murmurs rippled through the courtyard. What's wrong with her? Someone shouted. The auctioneer hesitated. Something he never did. He finally said, the seller reports she suffered severe scarring in a childhood fire. She sees, she walks, she works. But her appearance may disturb some. That was enough to make most men lose interest. A few laughed under their breath, trading cruel jokes. Others just stepped back. Gadsden's voice dropped. Starting bid, $10. No. 1 moved. 8, 7, still silence. The sun beat down. Sweat dripped from Gadsden's temple. His tone turned sharp. $5, gentlemen. Will no one offer $5? And then Samuel Rutledge raised his hand. The crowd turned. Some looked at him as if he'd lost his mind. One planter near the back, James Huger, a man Samuel knew from church, whispered. Either he's got courage or he's cursed. Gadsden's hammer fell. Sold. To Mr. Rutledge of Magnolia Bend Plantation. Lot 39, sold for $5. The lowest bid ever recorded at Ryan's Mart. Samuel later claimed it was logic, not pity. A strong worker for the price of a meal. But in the pages of his private journal, written that night by candlelight, he confessed something else. I bid because the silence felt like a sin. Because she stood there alone while men laughed. Because I thought of Catherine, and what she would think of me if I did nothing. God forgive me. I bid out of shame, not sense. After completing the papers, Samuel found the woman waiting in the courtyard, still covered. He didn't ask her name. Didn't remove the burlap. She followed him quietly to the wagon. The ride back to Colton County was long and hot. The cicadas screamed in the trees. Dust rose from the wheels, coating everything in a fine gray film. At one point, Samuel glanced back. The woman hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still, head bowed, hands folded, like a statue wrapped in sackcloth. He told himself she was tired. Or frightened. But deep down, something else stirred. Something colder. By sunset, the road narrowed into the moss-draped lanes of Magnolia Bend. The overseer, William Priolo, came out to meet the wagon. When he saw the woman still wearing the burlap sack, he frowned. "You bought her like that?" he asked. Samuel nodded. "She'll work in the fields. Keep her separate from the house staff." Priolo grunted. "A strange one, sir. Strange things bring strange luck." That night, while the rest of the plantation slept, Samuel woke to the sound of footsteps outside his window. Slow, dragging. He rose and went to the shutters, but the yard was empty. Only the sound of cicadas. Only the glow of the moon. But the next morning, the dogs refused to go near the cabin where number 39 had been housed. And when Samuel finally told Priolo to remove the sack from her head, the overseer returned pale as ash, his voice shaking. "Sir," he whispered, "you better come see for yourself." To be continued. If you're hooked already, make sure you're subscribed to Liturgy of Fear so you don't miss part 2 of the Rutledge Curse, the woman known as number 39. Leave a comment with your state. We love seeing where our listeners are tuning in from. Next time, we'll step inside Magnolia Bend and see what the overseer saw that morning. Would you like me to continue with part 2, 1000 words, in the same cinematic, voiceover-ready style, beginning with the morning after her arrival at Magnolia Bend? The Rutledge Curse. The woman known as number 39 part 2. Spanish moss hung from the oaks like gray shrouds, swaying gently in the dead air. The roads of Colton County were silent that afternoon, except for the sound of wagon wheels and a man trying to start a conversation with something that didn't want to talk. "Can you cook?" "Yes, sir." "Ever worked rice fields?" "Yes, sir." "Indigo?" "I don't know, sir." Her voice was faint, so quiet he could barely hear it over the creak of the wheels. That was the last word she spoke for the next 3 hours. If you've been following this story, you already know something dark came home to Magnolia Bend that August day in 1847. But what you don't know is how quickly the Rutledge family began to fall apart. Welcome back to Liturgy of Fear. If you're new here, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments what state you're listening from. We love seeing where these forgotten American nightmares reach. Now, let's return to Magnolia Bend Plantation, the evening the curse began to breathe. Rice Plant Part 2, The Arrival at Magnolia Bend. As the sun dropped behind the pines, the wagon rolled up the long dirt road toward the Rutledge home, a weathered white mansion with 6 tall columns and a wide porch that looked out across a dying rice field. Around it were the buildings that kept the place running. The kitchen house, the smokehouse, stables, and, farther off, behind a screen of cedar trees, the cabins of the enslaved workers. Samuel guided the wagon to the overseer's quarters. William Priolo stepped out wiping his neck with a rag. He was a large man, built like an ox, with a face that always seemed to be calculating the worth of everything he saw. Samuel gave a short explanation. $5. Field hand. Fire scarring. Put her wherever you need her. Priolo circled the wagon slowly. $5. He repeated. What's wrong with her? Disease. Madness. The auctioneer said nothing. Claimed she's healthy. And you believed him? Priolo muttered. Gadsden would lie to his own mother for $1. Samuel didn't answer. He was too tired, too uncertain, and too aware of the burlap sack still covering the woman's head. He told Priolo to find her a cabin and assign her to work immediately. As Samuel drove the wagon toward the main house, his daughters waited on the porch. Louisa, the older one, calm and proper, her mother's eyes. Margaret, the younger, restless, always asking questions she shouldn't. He didn't tell them much. Just that he had purchased a new worker to help with harvest. That night, as crickets screamed in the dark and the air hung heavy with river fog, Samuel tried to focus on his account books. But the numbers refused to stay still. Something about the purchase gnawed at him. Not guilt, not exactly. It was the silence. The way 30 men at Ryan's Mart had backed away like the woman carried a sickness you could catch from her shadow. And the burlap sack, still there, still hiding whatever truth he'd bought for $5. Crescent moon the first weeks. Number 39 was sent to the rice fields the next morning. The work was brutal. Mud up to the knees, mosquitoes thick as smoke, sun burning through the skin. But she never complained, never slowed, never spoke unless spoken to. She worked alone, on the eastern parcel, farthest from the main house and the road. Priolo said she was strong, obedient, efficient, but no one talked to her. Not the other workers, not even Priolo for long. Samuel rarely saw her. Only glimpses through the haze when he rode out to inspect the dikes and ditches. Each time, she wore the same covering. That sack, that silence, and every time, Samuel felt oddly relieved that he didn't have to see her face. For 3 quiet weeks, nothing happened. Then came Sunday, September 5th. Coffin the first sign. Samuel's daughters attended church as usual at St. Bartholomew's. The sun was merciless that morning, baking the pews, filling the air with the smell of old wood and sweat. On the carriage ride home, Margaret complained of a headache. She went straight to her room to rest. An hour later, Louisa screamed. Samuel ran upstairs and found Margaret on the floor, her body jerking violently, foam spilling from her mouth, eyes rolled white. He sent for Dr. Henry Middleton, who lived 4 miles away. By the time the doctor arrived, Margaret had stopped seizing but hadn't woken. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale and cold despite the heat. Middleton checked her pulse, her pupils, her color. He asked about her diet, her mood, her activities. She was fine this morning, Samuel said. Perfectly fine. The doctor frowned. Sometimes these fits come from hysteria or overexcitement, he said. I'll leave laudanum for when she wakes. Margaret woke that evening, weak, confused, her head pounding. She didn't remember the seizure, or the hours after. When Louisa spoke, she flinched from the light and whispered, "Why can't I remember our horse's name?" Dr. Middleton had warned confusion might follow, but over the next few days, things only got worse. The headaches grew unbearable. She had 2 more seizures, each worse than the last. Her memory unraveled like old thread. Sometimes she forgot where she was. Other times she called Louisa, "Mother," and asked when Father was coming home, even as he sat beside her. Samuel sent for Middleton again. The doctor looked grim. "I've seen something like this after head injuries," he said, "or poisoning. But she's had neither." He sighed, defeated. "Rest, laudanum, prayer, it's all I can offer." Skull the decline. By late September, Margaret rarely left her bed. Her once bright laughter now came out in whispers that made no sense. She talked to people who weren't there. She said she saw a woman standing by the cedar trees at night, watching the house. Louisa tried to comfort her, reading from the Bible and cooling her forehead with damp cloths. But sometimes Margaret would stop her mid-sentence and say, "She's behind you, Louisa. Don't turn around." Samuel dismissed it as fever dreams, until one morning, when Louisa entered the room to find muddy footprints on the floorboards beneath the window. Small, bare, and still damp. She checked outside. No sign of anyone. The ground was soft, the prints leading nowhere. That night, Samuel sat awake in his study, candle burning low, listening to the sounds of the plantation. Frogs, crickets, the occasional splash from the river. And then, faintly, the slow creak of a cabin door somewhere beyond the cedars. He rose, heart pounding, and stepped onto the porch. From the edge of the darkness, he thought he saw movement, a figure standing perfectly still between the trees. When the wind shifted, he caught the faint scent of smoke and wet burlap. If you want to know what Samuel saw the next morning, and what the overseer found in the eastern field, make sure you're subscribed to Liturgy of Fear. Tap that bell and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Next episode. Part 3, The Cedar Trees Whisper at Night. Would you like me to continue with Part 3, 1000 words, in this same cinematic and YouTube voiceover ready format, beginning with what the overseer discovers in the eastern fields the following dawn? Part 3, The Woman Behind the Burlap. Hook opening for YouTube narration. When medicine failed and faith began to crack, Louisa made one desperate suggestion. Ask the enslaved people for help. Because somewhere in their memories, passed from mother to daughter, were remedies that white doctors never learned. But when Samuel agreed, he had no idea that the answer to saving his daughter would come from a woman who hid her face beneath a burlap sack. And that her knowledge might reveal something far darker than disease. Story begins. It was Louisa who first spoke the idea aloud, her voice trembling as she faced her father across the candlelit parlor. "Papa," she said softly, "maybe someone among the workers knows of old remedies, herbs, teas, things that helped before doctors ever came." Samuel looked up from the letter he'd been pretending to read. His eyes were hollow from sleepless nights, the skin beneath them bruised with worry. "Louisa," he sighed, "I will not have witchcraft in this house." "It isn't witchcraft," she said. Quickly. "Mama believed in those things. Remember Rose, the old woman who used to make the poultices? She saved you once, when the fever nearly took you." He remembered. He remembered too well. At first, he resisted. Samuel was a man of science, a reader of journals, a believer in reason. He'd built his plantation on order, progress, and modern thinking. But none of that mattered now. Not while Margaret, the light of his home, was slipping away day by day. And when Louisa asked a third time, her voice breaking with fear, he finally said the words that changed everything. "Tell Priolo to ask around. See if anyone knows of such knowledge." The next day, the overseer returned with an answer that made Samuel's pulse quicken. "The woman from the auction," Priolo said. "Number 39. They say she might know something about healing." Samuel froze. The woman with the burlap sack. The one who never lifted her head. He hesitated, then nodded. "Bring her to the main house. Tonight." The sun was melting into the horizon when she arrived, small, thin, wrapped in that same rough sack that covered her head and shoulders. The air was heavy, humming with crickets, and Samuel met her on the back veranda where no one could see. Priolo stood nearby, arms crossed, clearly thinking this was nonsense. Samuel ignored him. He described Margaret's illness, the violent headaches, the memory loss, the shaking fits. When he finished, the woman stood silent for a long moment. Then, in that soft, steady voice, she said, "I might know something, sir. But I need to see her. To ask questions." Samuel hesitated. The thought of bringing this woman, this stranger, this faceless figure, into his dying daughter's room filled him with unease. But what was unease beside death? He led her inside. Louisa was reading from the Bible when they entered. The flickering lamplight cast deep shadows across her face. "Who is that?" she whispered. "This woman may know how to help Margaret," Samuel said. "We'll try anything now." Louisa nodded, her lips trembling. Hope and doubt battled quietly in her eyes. The woman moved to the bedside, each step slow, deliberate. She knelt beside Margaret, her dark hand resting gently on the girl's pale forehead. Her touch was light, almost motherly. "Miss Margaret," she whispered, "can you hear me?" Margaret stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, dazed and glassy. "Mother," she murmured weakly. "My head hurts. When can we go home?" "Soon," the woman said softly. "Soon, child. But first, I need to know, when did the pain start? What did you eat before it began? Did you touch or smell anything strange?" The questions came gently, one after another, while Margaret drifted in and out of consciousness. Louisa listened, tears tracing down her cheeks. Samuel stood motionless, listening to that calm, patient voice. It reminded him of Catherine, his late wife, when she soothed their daughters after nightmares. He had expected the woman to sound crude or fearful. Instead, she spoke like someone who understood suffering, and knew how to face it. After several minutes, the woman rose to her feet and turned toward the door. "May I speak with you, sir?" she asked quietly. They stepped out onto the veranda again. Night had fallen now, and the air buzzed with insects and dread. The moon cast a pale light over the woman's hands, smooth, unscarred, too perfect for someone supposedly disfigured by fire. Samuel noticed that, and it unsettled him. "Sir," she began, "I need to ask something. Please be truthful. Has your daughter been given anything special, food, drink, medicine, from anyone outside your household?" Samuel frowned. "No, everything comes from our kitchen. Dr. Middleton prescribed laudanum, but that's common." "Why?" The woman was silent, her head tilting slightly beneath the burlap. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. "Because the symptoms your daughter has, they match certain kinds of poisoning. Not from spoiled food, but from a plant that builds its poison slowly inside the body." Samuel's heart thudded. "Poisoning," he whispered. "You mean, someone is doing this to her?" "It's possible," the woman said. "There's a plant called white snake root. It grows in shaded woods. Used the wrong way, it brings confusion, seizures, and death." Slowly, silently, most doctors never suspect. The night seemed to grow colder around them. Samuel gripped the railing, his knuckles white. "Can you save her? If the poisoning stops now?" "Yes," she said. "The body can heal, but she must take nothing touched by whoever's doing this. And, sir, if I am right, they will try again." He wanted to ask how she knew all this, how a woman bought for $5 could speak with the precision of a scholar, but something in her voice stopped him. "I was taught," she said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "By someone who knew that the same roots that heal can also kill. I do not practice harm, but I know how to recognize it." Her tone was steady, but beneath it Samuel heard pain, old, buried pain. She told him what to do. Margaret must eat only food prepared by someone he trusted completely. No more laudanum. She must drink clean water, often. And someone must stay with her at all times. "If my suspicion is wrong," she said, "you'll know in a few days. But if I'm right, your daughter will begin to heal." That night, Samuel set new rules. Patience, their longtime cook, would make every meal herself. Priolo was ordered to watch the house for strangers. Louisa stayed by Margaret's side. And Samuel sat awake, pistol in hand, listening to his daughter's breathing, praying it wouldn't stop. By the third day, the change was clear. The seizures stopped. The fever eased. Margaret began to sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks. And while relief washed over Samuel's heart, another feeling began to take its place. A cold, creeping fear. Because if the woman was right, then someone in his own household was trying to kill his child. To be continued. Right finger next time. Part 4. Samuel begins to uncover the terrible truth. And learns that the woman behind the burlap knows more about his family than she should. Part 4. Shadows in the kitchen. Hook for YouTube narration. Margaret was healing. The fits stopped, the fever broke, and Samuel dared to hope again. But peace doesn't come easy to a house that's been touched by poison. Because while one sickness faded, another began to grow. And soon, Samuel would learn that the danger was closer than he'd ever feared. Lurking not in the swamps or the fields, but inside his own kitchen. Story begins. For the first time in weeks, there was quiet in Margaret's room. The child slept soundly, her breathing light and even. Louisa sat beside her bed, her Bible open but unread, the candle burning low. Downstairs, Samuel stood alone by the veranda railing, watching the mist roll in from the river. The air smelled of wet earth and night jasmine. Somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt watched. Every time the wind rustled through the oak trees, he found himself glancing over his shoulder, expecting to see the woman with the burlap sack standing there in the shadows. She had left the previous night, vanishing as silently as she came. When Samuel asked where she was staying, Priolo only shrugged. "Probably down by the quarters, sir. But no one's seen her face. The women say she keeps to herself." Samuel didn't press further. A part of him didn't want to know. Still, her words haunted him. Someone in your house is poisoning your child. He began his own quiet investigation. The first person he watched was Patience, their cook, a stout, soft-spoken woman who had served the family for nearly 20 years. Her hands were steady, her eyes kind. He had trusted her more than anyone on the plantation. Could she have done this? He hated himself for even wondering. Every morning, he stood in the kitchen doorway as Patience prepared Margaret's porridge, his eyes following every motion. She never flinched under his gaze, only asked if the girl was improving, always with genuine concern. But something else caught his attention that day. On the corner shelf, half hidden behind a crock of salt, was a small clay jar. No label, no markings. Patience used it once, just a pinch of its contents sprinkled into a sauce. Samuel's stomach tightened. "What is that?" he asked sharply. Patience blinked. "Just seasoning, sir. Dried herbs. Nothing more." "Where did you get it?" "From the garden, I believe. Or maybe from old stores in the pantry. Mrs. Hargrove used it too, God rest her." Samuel said nothing. But that night, when the kitchen was empty, he returned. He lifted the lid and sniffed. The scent was faint, earthy, bitter, not quite familiar. He remembered the woman's words. A plant that grows in shaded places. A slow poison. He carried the jar outside and buried it beneath the magnolia tree, his heart pounding the entire time. The next morning, Margaret was even stronger. She could sit up, drink broth, even smile. Louisa cried when she saw her sister's eyes finally clear again. But the moment of joy didn't last long. That evening, as Samuel was reading by the fire, Criollo entered the parlor, hat in hand. "Sir," he said quietly, "we've got a problem." Samuel looked up. "What kind of problem?" "The woman. Number 39. She's gone." "Gone?" Criollo nodded. "Left the quarters sometime in the night. Nobody saw her leave. Took nothing with her. Like she vanished." Samuel's chest tightened. "Did you check the river?" "Yes, sir. No sign. The workers say she was muttering about unfinished work before she disappeared." Unfinished work. The phrase chilled him to the bone. That night, he dreamed of the woman. She stood at the foot of his bed, the burlap sack still covering her head. Her voice came through the darkness, soft, but echoing like it came from far away. "You stopped the poison, but not the hand that mixed it," she whispered. "Until you find the one who fed it to her, your house will not rest." He woke drenched in sweat, his heart hammering, the echo of her voice still ringing in his ears. 2 days later, the nightmare began to take shape in the daylight. Patience came running from the kitchen, her apron soaked with sweat. "Sir, you better come quick." Samuel hurried after her. The smell hit him before he reached the door, burned herbs, sharp and metallic. On the table sat a bowl of soup, untouched, but beside it, the wooden spoon had blackened at the edge, as if something inside had corroded it. "What happened?" Samuel demanded. Patience trembled. "I don't know, sir. I was making supper for Miss Margaret. Turned my back for a minute to fetch more broth, and when I came back, it smelled foul. Like death itself." Louisa entered, pale with fear. "Papa, someone's trying again, aren't they?" Samuel didn't answer. He lifted the bowl to his nose. Beneath the smoke and bitterness, he caught a faint scent, familiar now, like the jar he'd buried under the magnolia tree. Someone had dug it up. That night, he gathered everyone from the household, Patience, Criollo, the house servants, even the field hands who worked closest to the main house. The storm outside rattled the shutters as thunder rolled. Across the valley, "Someone under this roof is trying to kill my daughter," Samuel said, his voice low but deadly calm. "And I will find out who." Eyes darted across the room. No one spoke. The only sound was the rain hammering the tin roof. Then, from the doorway, came a voice that froze every soul in the room. "She's right, you know." Everyone turned. There she was, the woman in burlap, soaked from the rain, standing as still as a shadow. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she stepped inside. "I told you the poison would return. Evil don't stop easy, sir." Samuel's heart leapt to his throat. "Where have you been?" "Watching," she said simply. "Waiting to see if you believed me. And now, I see you do." She crossed the room, her bare feet leaving wet prints on the floorboards. She stopped beside the table where the blackened spoon still lay. "This isn't about medicine or sickness anymore," she said quietly. "It's about hate. Someone in this house wants what you love most to die." The wind howled through the open window, blowing out one of the candles. For a moment, everyone stood in the dim, flickering light, faces pale, fearful, eyes locked on the faceless woman who had returned from the storm. Then she lifted her hand and pointed, straight toward the corner where Patience stood. "Tell him," the woman said softly. "Tell him why you did it." Patience's eyes went wide, her lips parted, but no words came out. The room fell into silence except for the distant rumble of thunder. And that's when Samuel realized. The truth wasn't just about who had poisoned his daughter. It was about why, and the answer would destroy everything he thought he knew about loyalty, family, and sin. To be continued. Part 5, The Confession. Hook for YouTube narration. The faceless woman returned from the storm. The poison was back, and her finger pointed straight at Patience, the woman who'd fed the Hargrove family for 20 years. But in houses built on secrets, truth comes out slow. And never clean. Because sometimes, confession doesn't set you free. It only calls the ghosts closer. Story begins. The room froze. Every eye turned toward Patience, standing in the corner by the hearth, the candlelight trembling against her dark skin. Rain pounded the windows, thunder cracked overhead. No one breathed. Samuel's heart hammered in his chest. "What is she talking about?" he demanded. Patience shook her head, her hands raised slightly. "Sir, I swear on my soul, I ain't never hurt Miss Margaret." "Never." The woman in the burlap sack didn't move. She stood still as a gravestone. "Lies burn slow, same as poison," she whispered. "But they both leave a mark." Samuel's jaw clenched. "Explain yourself, woman. If you have proof, speak it plain." The stranger stepped forward, her soaked skirt trailing water across the floor. "When I came back just now," she said, "I went to the garden. The magnolia tree. The earth there's been turned. Something was dug up. And that something was the jar you buried, sir." Samuel's breath caught. "You knew about that." "I did. Because I told you to watch for it. That jar wasn't yours, nor mine. But someone went digging after you laid it to rest. Someone who missed their weapon." Her gaze turned toward Patience again. She knew where the spices were kept. She worked that kitchen alone. She'd know how to hide the taste. Patience's lips trembled. "Please, sir, I only do what I'm told. I cook what you ask." "I never." The woman cut her off. "You didn't act alone." A low murmur rippled through the room. Priolo, standing near the back, stepped forward. "Now hold on," he said gruffly. "You're making wild accusations without evidence." The burlap woman tilted her head slightly toward him. "Are you defending her, Mr. Priolo, or yourself?" The overseer's eyes darkened. "You best watch your tongue, woman." "I've watched more than your tongue," she said softly. "I've watched your hands. You handle the stores, don't you? The deliveries, the shipments, the medicines. You decide what goes where." Priolo's fists clenched. "Are you calling me a murderer?" "I'm saying you keep the keys to the poison house." Samuel slammed his palm against the table. "Enough," he roared. "I will hear no more riddles. Someone tell me the truth, now." For a long moment, only the rain answered. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Patience said, "Sir, it's true. But I swear, I didn't want to. I didn't mean no harm to Miss Margaret." Samuel felt the world tilt. What did you do?" Patience's tears came fast. "He told me to, sir. He said it was for your own good." Samuel stared at her, then turned slowly toward Priolo. The overseer's face was like stone. "Explain yourself," Samuel said, his voice deadly quiet. Priolo met his gaze without blinking. "You've gone soft, Hargrove. Ever since your wife died, this place has fallen apart. The crops are failing, debts piling up, and you spend your days praying instead of working. You needed something to wake you up." "Wake me up," Samuel hissed. "By killing my daughter." "Not kill," Priolo snapped. "Just scare you. Enough to make you focus again. A few drops in her food, something to make her sick, get your attention." I told Patience to use just a touch, nothing more. Patience sobbed. He said it wouldn't hurt her. He said it was just to make you call for the doctor. The woman in the burlap shook her head slowly. White snake root don't scare, it kills. There's no such thing as a little poison. Priolo glared at her. You're one to talk. Nobody even knows who you are. You stroll in here, hiding your face, telling stories like some swamp witch. The woman turned toward him, her voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. You should remember that word, overseer. Witch. Because if you understood what that means, you'd stop speaking my name in vain. The thunder rolled again, closer this time, shaking the glass panes. Samuel took a step forward. Priolo, you will leave this house at once. I will have the sheriff here by morning. But Priolo only smirked. And tell him what? That your daughter got sick from a kitchen mistake. That you listened to a masked woman accuse your overseer in a thunderstorm. He took another step closer. You've no proof. No witness but her. Before Samuel could answer, lightning flashed, white and blinding, and for a heartbeat, the room was filled with light. Everyone saw it. The woman's face, just for an instant, visible through a tear in the burlap. Her skin was whole, untouched, beautiful, but her eyes glowed with something not entirely human. Then the light vanished. The room fell into shadow once more. Priolo stumbled back, his voice shaking. What are you? The woman didn't answer. She simply said, the one you tried to burn. A sudden gust of wind blew through the room, slamming open the shutters. Candles flickered wildly, and then came a sound, soft at first, then louder, the creak of footsteps upstairs. Everyone froze. Louisa gasped. Father! Margaret's room. Samuel bolted from the room, taking the stairs two at a time. Louisa and Patience followed. The woman with the burlap sack was already there when he reached the landing, as if she had appeared out of the air itself. Margaret sat upright in bed, eyes wide and terrified. Papa, she whispered, there was someone in my room. Samuel's pulse thundered. Who? She pointed toward the window. The curtain billowed inward with the wind. I don't know, she said, shaking. They were standing right there, watching me. Samuel ran to the window and looked out. Through the sheets of rain, he could barely make out a figure moving through the yard, fast, heading toward the stables. Priolo, he muttered, and tore out of the room. Downstairs, the overseer was already saddling his horse when Samuel burst into the barn. You won't run from this, Samuel shouted. Priolo turned, his face twisted with rage and fear. You don't understand what she is. That woman, she's not flesh and blood. She's the devil herself. Samuel stepped closer, the thunder booming around them. You poisoned my daughter. You used my trust to destroy my family. And now you'll answer for it. Priolo grabbed a lantern from the wall. You think you can stop her? She's cursed, Hargrove. That thing's been haunting this plantation long before you bought it. And before Samuel could move, Priolo hurled the lantern. It smashed against the barn wall. Fire erupted instantly, swallowing the hay, the beams, the air itself. Samuel dove aside as flames roared up toward the roof. Outside, the woman stood in the rain, watching the fire burn. The burlap sack clung to her head like a funeral veil. Beside her, Louisa clutched Margaret's trembling hand. What's happening? Louisa whispered. The woman didn't look away from the blaze. Justice, she said softly. And reckoning. To be continued. Part 6. The Burning Truth. The barn was burning. The overseer had vanished into the smoke. And the faceless woman stood in the rain, watching it all like she'd seen this fire before. But fire doesn't cleanse haunted ground. At Willow Bend, it only wakes what sleeps beneath. Story begins. The barn collapsed in a scream of timber and flame. Samuel Hargrove staggered backward, choking on smoke and ash, his hair singed, his coat torn. The heat pressed against his face like judgment. Priolo, he shouted into the blaze. Face me, damn you. No answer came, only the roaring of fire and the hissing of wet earth as rain met flame. Then, faintly, a cry. A man's voice, somewhere inside. But by the time Samuel stepped forward, the roof gave way, burying everything in a shower of sparks and smoke. Louisa and Margaret ran toward him from the veranda, the woman with the burlap sack behind them. "Papa!" Louisa screamed. "You'll burn." He stumbled back just as a beam crashed at his feet, scattering embers across the mud. The woman raised a hand. "Let it fall," she said. This fire was Ode. Samuel turned on her, fury breaking through his shock. "Ode, you speak as if you wanted this." She didn't flinch. "The land remembers every crime done upon it. Sometimes it pays in blood, sometimes in flame." Samuel's chest heaved. "You speak like you've been here before." "I have," she whispered. "More times than you'd believe." By morning, the barn was nothing but blackened skeletons of timber and smoke curling from ash. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy and gray. They found Priolo's body near the smoldering ruins, or what was left of it. His face was charred beyond recognition, but one hand still clutched something half-melted, a silver locket. Samuel knelt beside it. "This belonged to Margaret's mother," he murmured. "How did he?" The woman crouched opposite him, her burlap mask dripping with soot. "He stole from the dead," she said. "That's why the fire took him first." Samuel shot her a hard look. "You talk like the flames obey you." She stood slowly. "No, Mr. Hargrove. They obey truth. And truth has been patient long enough." Inside the house, Margaret lay pale but breathing. Louisa sat beside her bed, holding a damp cloth to her sister's forehead. Patience hovered near the door, guilt etched deep into her face. "Sir," she said softly. "What will become of me?" Samuel turned to her, eyes hollow. "You told me the truth when you didn't have to. That may have saved my daughter. You'll stay until this is settled." Patience nodded, relief and sorrow tangled on her face. "Thank you, sir. But there's something else you should know." The woman turned her head slightly, listening. "When I went out back to fetch the herbs this morning," Patience continued, "I saw something in the garden. The ground's been dug up again. Fresh." Samuel frowned. "The same place." She nodded. "By the magnolia. And this time, something's come up." They went out together, Samuel, Louisa, the masked woman, and Patience. The morning mist still clung to the earth, the magnolia tree standing pale against the sky like a ghost in bloom. At the base of its roots, the soil was torn open. Half buried in the mud was a wooden box, small, rotted, and nailed shut with old iron. Louisa knelt and brushed away the dirt. "Papa, is this what you buried?" Samuel shook his head slowly. "No, I never saw this before." The woman crouched beside the box. "This was buried long before you bought the land. Help me lift it." Together they pried it open. The lid creaked, the hinges snapping with age. Inside lay a bundle of cloth, faded and brown with time. The woman reached in and unwrapped it gently. Louisa gasped. It was a child's dress. Torn, stained dark with what could only be blood. And wrapped within its folds, a small porcelain doll with one eye missing. Samuel's breath caught. "What in God's name?" The woman ran her fingers over the fabric as if recognizing it by touch. "This was hers," she whispered. "The girl they said I drowned." Patience took a step back. "Lord save us." Samuel looked at her sharply. "What are you saying?" The woman rose, clutching the doll. "When this house was new, before it bore your name, another family lived here, the Tanners. The master took what wasn't his to take." The mother screamed. The child vanished. "They said I'd curse them, but it was their sin that cursed me." Louisa's voice trembled. "You mean, you're her? The woman they burned?" The burlap mask turned toward her slowly. "What's left of her?" A chill swept through the garden despite the morning sun. The magnolia's branches swayed though the air was still. Samuel's voice was low, trembling. "If that's true, why come back now?" "Because the blood never stopped flowing," she said. "Every owner after them fed it. Greed, deceit, murder. You may not have struck the match, but your family inherited the ash." She turned toward the smoking ruins of the barn. "The land remembers, Mr. Hargrove. And it wants balance." Samuel stepped closer, desperate. "Then tell me what to do. I'll make it right. Just tell me how to end this." The woman tilted her head, the burlap rustling softly. "There is no ending. There's only paying what's owed." That night, as the wind howled through the trees, Samuel sat in his study staring at the locket he'd taken from Priolo's hand. Inside was a miniature portrait, not of Margaret's mother, but of another woman entirely. One Samuel had never seen. Dark hair, eyes like winter glass, and carved faintly beneath the painting, E.T. He frowned. E.T. The initials burned in his mind. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind him. He turned, but no one was there. The candlelight flickered, then went out. He stood in darkness, heart pounding. And then, from the window, came a whisper. "You can't buy forgiveness." The voice was soft, the same voice from the night of the storm. He spun toward it, lightning flashing across the glass, and in that flash, he saw her. Standing beyond the window, the woman, the burlap mask gone, her face burned, twisted, half bone, half beauty, and her eyes hollowed by centuries of grief. Samuel stumbled back, breath caught in his throat. When the lightning faded, she was gone. But the windowpane dripped red, like blood tracing downward. Down the hall, Louise awoke to the sound of distant footsteps, slow, dragging, rhythmic. She rose, candle in hand, and stepped into the corridor. "Papa," she whispered. No answer. The sound came again, closer now. She turned toward the stairwell, and froze. At the far end of the hallway stood a figure. A little girl, wearing a torn, blood-stained dress. Holding a porcelain doll with one eye missing. "Who are you?" Louisa whispered. The child tilted her head. The candle flickered. "She's coming," the girl said. "You can't hide from her." Then she turned and vanished into the darkness. To be continued. Part 7, The Haunting of Willow Bend. Hook for narration. When the fire died, the whispers began. At night, the house breathed, slow and heavy, like something ancient waking beneath its floors. And Louisa Hargrove soon realized. The curse wasn't buried in the earth anymore. It was walking through the halls. Story begins. The air inside Willow Bend had changed. It smelled of damp wood and something sour, something old, as though the house itself had turned inside out. Louisa woke every night to the same sound. Soft footsteps in the hallway, too light to be her father's, too steady to be a dream. When she rose and looked through the keyhole, she sometimes saw movement, the swish of a white dress, a pale hand brushing the wall. But whenever she opened the door, nothing. The nights stretched long and sleepless. Margaret was improving, thank God, but Louisa herself was unraveling. She jumped at creaks, at wind, at shadows that clung too long. And the woman with the burlap mask, the one who'd saved Margaret, now seemed to avoid her altogether. One gray afternoon, as rain whispered against the windows, Louisa found the woman sitting alone on the back veranda, staring into the wet fields. "Ma'am," Louisa said gently. "You said the land remembers, that it wants balance. What happens if it doesn't get it?" The woman didn't turn. "Then it takes what it's owed." Louisa swallowed. "And what does it think is owed now?" Finally, the woman looked up. Her voice was softer than ever. "Your father's truth. The one he's hiding, even from himself." Louisa frowned. "Papa hasn't done anything." The woman tilted her head slightly. "Every Hargrove has. Even the ones who believed they were good men." Louisa wanted to argue, but her throat closed. Somewhere deep down, she knew there was something her father never talked about. Something that made him keep a bottle of whiskey hidden behind his ledgers and stare into the fire until dawn. That night, she decided to find out what it was. The storm had returned, wind rattling the shutters and lightning flashing over the trees. Louisa lit a candle and went to her father's study. The door creaked open. Inside, the fire was out, and the air felt thick, heavy with dust and old smoke. On his desk lay a stack of papers, letters, and an old map of the plantation. But one sheet lay apart, sealed with wax and marked in her father's careful hand, "Do not open." Louisa hesitated only a moment before breaking the seal. Inside was a confession, dated 15 years earlier. "I write this knowing the truth will damn me, yet silence has already begun to rot my soul. The fire that killed the Tanner family was not an accident. It was set by my father to claim their land. I was a boy, but I helped carry the oil. Their screams haunt me still. The curse that follows this soil is our inheritance, and I fear one day it will ask for me, or worse, for my blood." Louisa's hands shook. The candle flickered wildly. Suddenly, the study door slammed shut behind her. She spun around, heart hammering, and saw her own reflection in the window pane. Only, it wasn't quite hers. A second figure stood beside her reflection, a little girl with tangled hair, one blue eye, and a porcelain doll hanging limply from her hand. Louisa gasped and turned, but the room was empty. Then came a child's whisper, right behind her ear. "Now you know." She fled the study, nearly tripping over the carpet. The candle blew out, plunging her into darkness. Thunder cracked so loud it shook the glass in the windows. When she reached the stairs, she froze. At the bottom, in the flicker of lightning, stood her father, barefoot, shirt undone, eyes wide as if he'd just woken from a nightmare. "Louisa," he called, "what are you doing awake?" Before she could answer, the front door creaked open on its own. A rush of cold air swept through the hall, carrying the smell of wet earth and decay. And then she saw her. The woman with the burlap mask was standing on the porch, soaked in rain. But the mask was gone. Her face, half beautiful, half burned, gleamed in the lightning flash. Her eyes glowed faintly, like embers under ash. Samuel took a step back. "What do you want from us?" She stepped forward. "I told you. Truth. You've had it," he shouted. "I confessed. I tried to make it right." The woman shook her head slowly. "You wrote the words, but you never spoke them. The land doesn't read letters, Mr. Hargrove. It listens." Behind her, the storm howled, rattling the magnolia branches until they seemed to reach for the house. Margaret appeared on the stairs, pale and frightened. "Papa, what's happening?" Samuel's eyes darted between his daughters. "Go back to bed, Maggie." But it was too late. The floorboards trembled. Water began seeping from the cracks, black, thick, smelling of rot. The lamps flickered, then burst, sending glass across the floor. Louisa grabbed her sister's hand. "We have to get out." The woman raised a hand. "You can't run from what's buried beneath your feet." The front door slammed shut with a thunderous clap. The walls groaned. A low moan rose from the earth, not whined, but voices. Dozens of them, crying, screaming, chanting in a language no one understood. Margaret began to shake. "Make them stop, please." Samuel dropped to his knees. "What do you want from me?" The woman stepped closer, rain dripping from her burned skin. "I want you to remember their names." "I don't know them," he cried. "Then learn them," she hissed. "Every one." The house shuddered again, then, suddenly, the noise stopped. The silence was so deep it hurt their ears. And then, faintly, from the upstairs hallway came a small, brittle laugh. Louisa turned her head slowly. There, at the end of the hall, the child ghost stood again, the one with the doll. She was smiling now, but her smile was wrong. Too wide, too knowing. "Now we're all together," she said. And then the floor beneath her burst open, a blast of wind, soil, and screams rushing upward. The little girl vanished in a swirl of dust. The fire roared back to life in the hearth, burning blue. The woman looked at Samuel one last time. "She's awake now," she whispered. "And she remembers everything." By morning, the storm had passed. The sun rose blood-red over the fields. No one spoke of what happened that night. Margaret slept fitfully, muttering strange words in her dreams. Louisa sat beside her, staring out the window at the magnolia tree, the same one where they'd found the box. And Samuel stood alone on the veranda, watching the smoke rise from the soil as though the earth itself was exhaling after a long sleep. In the distance, the blackened barn still smoldered, and above it all, faint but clear, a child's laughter drifted on the wind. To be continued. Part 8, The Child in the Walls. Historic horror, the Willow Bend wager. The storm had passed, but Willow Bend was not calm. At night, the walls whispered names, the mirrors trembled, and Louisa Hargrove began to hear a voice, a child's voice, calling from inside the house. And when she finally answered, the house answered back. Story approximately equals 1,000 words. For 3 days, the plantation seemed frozen in uneasy quiet. No one spoke about the night the fire turned blue or the voices that rose from the earth. Samuel went about his duties with a kind of desperate calm, as though routine might keep his sanity intact. Margaret's fever came and went, but she no longer ceased. She was weak, pale, and easily frightened, often glancing toward the window as though something stood just outside, watching her. Louisa tried to soothe her, reading Bible verses in a trembling voice. But sometimes, when she looked up, she found Margaret mouthing different words, old words, in a language Louisa couldn't recognize. When Louisa asked what she was saying, her sister only smiled faintly and said, "She's teaching me." That word, "she," made Louisa's stomach twist. Because Louisa had seen that child ghost. And she had felt its presence every night since. On the fourth night, Louisa woke to a tapping. Soft, deliberate, tap, tap, tap. It came from the wall beside her bed. She sat up, her breath caught in her throat. The sound stopped. Then, 3 knocks, quicker now. Tap tap tap. She rose, holding her candle close. "Who's there?" she whispered. For a moment, silence. Then, faintly, like breath through the boards. "Lulu," her own name, drawn out like a sigh. The voice of a child. Louisa pressed her hand to the wall, trembling. "Where are you?" The voice came again, barely more than a whisper. "In the dark. You left us here." Her candle flickered violently, the flame bending sideways though there was no wind. The tapping resumed, faster now, all around her, like dozens of small hands pressing against the walls. She dropped the candle, backing away until she hit the dresser. "Stop," she cried. "Please stop." Instantly, silence. Only her ragged breathing filled the room. When Samuel burst in moments later, pistol in hand, she was on the floor, staring at the wall with wide, empty eyes. By morning, Louisa insisted she'd just been dreaming, though she barely touched her breakfast. But the truth haunted her thoughts all day. If the voices were real, if the child ghost truly existed, then maybe she was trying to tell Louisa something. Something buried. Something that Samuel had never confessed. When her father rode into town that afternoon to meet with Dr. Middleton, Louisa seized her chance. She went to the burned barn, where the strange woman, the one who had saved Margaret, had been staying since that awful night. The air around the barn still smelled of smoke and damp earth. When Louisa entered, the woman was kneeling before a row of jars filled with cloudy water and herbs, whispering to herself. Without turning, she said, "You heard her, didn't you?" Louisa froze. "How do you know?" "She speaks to those the land hasn't judged yet." The woman finally turned. Her burlap mask was gone for good now, revealing her half-burned face. The scars twisted when she smiled. "She's looking for what's missing." Louisa stepped closer. She said, "You left us here. What does that mean?" The woman pointed toward the magnolia trees that lined the edge of the property. "There are graves under those trees, but not all of them are marked." Louisa's blood ran cold. "You mean, your father's confession only told part of it? The Tanners weren't the only ones who died in that fire. Some were buried alive, sealed beneath the foundation of the old storehouse that burned down years ago." Louisa's throat tightened. "Buried alive?" The woman nodded slowly. "The child you saw, she remembers. The curse keeps her bound here until someone speaks the truth of what happened." That night, Louisa dreamed of fire. She saw the child again, standing in the flames, holding her doll. The heat should have burned her skin, but she only smiled. Then, the doll turned its head toward Louisa. It spoke in a tiny, broken voice. "Find where they sleep, before he builds over them again." Louisa jolted awake, heart pounding. The window was open. A faint breeze stirred the curtains. And in the distance, under the magnolia trees, a single candlelight flickered. Someone was out there. She slipped on her shawl and crept outside. The night was heavy and damp, the air buzzing with insects. The candle moved slowly through the trees, and when she drew near, she saw it wasn't a person holding it at all. It floated, steady and silent, over the ground. The earth beneath it looked disturbed, as though something had been recently dug up and buried again. Louisa knelt, her hands shaking, and brushed away the wet soil. Her fingers struck wood, a small coffin. Her breath hitched. "Oh, dear God." The candle flame burned blue. And then she heard the voice again, right beside her ear. "Not me," the child whispered. "There are others." Morning came pale and cold. Louisa told her father what she'd found. At first, Samuel denied everything, said she must have dreamed it, that she was hysterical. But when she led him to the magnolia grove, and he saw the ground disturbed, saw the faint outline of 3 more mounds, his face drained of color. He sank to his knees. No, he murmured, not again. Louisa grabbed his arm. Papa, who are they? Samuel didn't answer at first. Then, in a voice hoarse with guilt, he said, field hands. Children. My father ordered the old storehouse burned when he thought they'd run away. He was wrong. They were inside. Louisa's stomach twisted. And you helped bury them. Tears streaked his face. I was a boy. I thought it would stop the screaming if we covered the ground. The woman with the burned face appeared at the edge of the trees, her eyes dark with something like pity. The land remembers every scream, Mr. Hargrove. And now your daughter has heard them too. Louisa turned. Can we free them? Can we end this? The woman nodded. Perhaps. But it will cost you. Samuel looked up, defeated. Cost me what? Everything you've tried to keep, she said. Your peace. Your name. Maybe your soul. The wind stirred the branches overhead, whispering through the moss. Louisa shivered. For the first time, she understood. This curse wasn't just about revenge. It was about truth refusing to stay buried. And Willow Bend still had secrets left to tell. To be continued in Part 9. Part 9, The Roots Beneath Willow Bend. Historic horror, the Willow Bend wager. Some sins rot in silence. Some grow roots. As the Hargroves began to unearth the bodies beneath the magnolias, the earth itself turned against them. Every shovel of dirt stirred voices. Every name spoken pulled something darker from below. And Louisa was about to learn. You can't dig up the dead without waking what holds them down. The morning after Louisa's discovery dawned red, as if the sun itself rose in blood. A fog clung low to the ground, weaving between the trees like pale fingers. The air reeked of damp soil and iron. Samuel Hargrove stood at the edge of the magnolia grove, his boots sinking into the mud. 3 wooden crosses lay in the dirt before him, crudely cut and splintered. His trembling hands held a shovel, though it felt more like a weapon than a tool of mercy. Louisa watched him from the porch, her eyes hollow from sleeplessness. The woman with the burned face stood beside her, wrapped in a black shawl that seemed to absorb the morning light. You can't just dig them up, Louisa said softly. Not without a prayer. The woman's scarred lips curved faintly. Prayer won't save you now, child. Truth will. And truth always demands a grave to be opened. Samuel began to dig. The shovel's first strike rang through the grove like thunder. The soil was soft, too soft, and it exhaled a sickly sweet odor as if the earth itself was breathing. With every thrust of the blade, the fog seemed to thicken. Louisa heard whispers, faint, fluttering, like a choir of unseen children repeating a single word. Remember, remember. Her father didn't stop, not until the shovel struck wood. He froze. The sound echoed like a bell. Then, with a trembling hand, he brushed away the dirt until the coffin's lid appeared. It was rotted, soaked black with time, and split down the center. Louisa moved closer despite the woman's warning hand. Papa, she whispered. Wait, but Samuel was already prying it open. The wood groaned, and a rush of air hissed upward, cold and sour. Inside lay a child's bones, tangled in scraps of linen. But the skull was turned unnaturally, not toward heaven, but to the side, as if listening. Samuel dropped the lid and staggered back. God forgive me, he rasped. God forgive. The ground shuddered beneath his feet. The magnolia branches creaked, and black sap began to drip from the flowers. The whispers grew louder. Not forgiven, not forgotten. Louisa fell to her knees, clutching the small wooden cross she had brought. What do they want? She cried. What will make it stop? The burned woman's eyes glinted like embers through smoke. Not what. Who? The curse belongs to the blood that buried them. It will only end when the last of that blood joins them. Samuel's head jerked up. He looked from the woman to his daughter, his face pale, streaked with mud and sweat. You mean me? The woman didn't answer. She didn't have to. That night, the house itself seemed to mourn. Every beam groaned, every window wept condensation like tears. Louisa sat beside her sister Margaret's bed, watching her restless sleep. The fever had returned, worse now. Her body twisted, and her lips moved soundlessly until suddenly she spoke, not her own voice, but that of a child. "They're waiting, Louisa. They're cold. They're lonely." He promised to bring light. Louisa's breath caught. Who promised? Margaret's eyes fluttered open, glassy and distant. "Your father." The words struck like a hammer. Louisa fled to the study, where her father sat by the fire with his head in his hands. The flames cast his shadow high on the wall, a black shape that twitched and bent, never quite matching his movements. "Papa," she said, standing in the doorway, "what did you promise them?" He didn't look up. "I was 12, my father made me swear never to tell. Said if the truth came out, the family would be cursed. I didn't believe him, until now." Louisa stepped closer. "But they're not resting, Papa. You must tell me what happened." Finally, Samuel raised his head. "The children belong to the Tanner family, the ones my father drove out. When their house burned, he blamed them for stealing. But one child survived, a girl. She saw everything. She hid in our barn." Louisa's heart stopped. "The girl from the well?" He nodded. "Yes. My father found her. He locked her in the root cellar beneath the storehouse, said it was to purify her. The others were already inside. The fire was no accident." He covered his face. "I helped him pile the wood." Louisa staggered backward, choking on the truth. All this time, the curse had not come to their family, it had grown from it. That night, rain began to fall again. Hard, cold, and endless. The trees bent under the weight, and lightning tore open the sky. Louisa lay awake, listening to the storm. Then came the sound, a faint scraping from below the floorboards. It wasn't rats. It was breathing. She rose, lighting a candle, and followed the sound down to the parlor. The boards creaked under her feet, damp with rising water. In the corner, the rug had curled up, exposing a square outline in the floor, a hidden hatch. Louisa knelt and pried it open. A rush of air escaped, cold and foul. A staircase spiraled down into the dark. She hesitated only a moment before descending, candle trembling in her hand. At the bottom, she found the root cellar. It was vast, larger than she remembered, and lined with stone walls slick with moisture. Bones jutted from the earth. Dozens of them, and in the center, a single small skeleton lay beneath a cracked doll. The candle flame dimmed, then flared blue. "Louisa." The voice came from the bones. Not a whisper now, a voice clear and full of sorrow. "Do you see now?" Louisa fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "I see. I'm sorry." The child's voice trembled. "He isn't." At that moment, footsteps echoed above, heavy, stumbling. Samuel's voice shouted, "Louisa! Get out of there!" She looked up, and saw her father standing at the top of the stairs, pistol in hand. The burned woman was behind him, her expression unreadable. "Don't!" Louisa cried. "She's not trying to hurt us." But Samuel was already aiming downward. "You don't understand. The curse isn't just on us, it's in us." He pulled the trigger. The shot rang out like thunder, but instead of fire, roots burst from the walls. They lashed around his legs, pulling him off his feet, dragging him down screaming into the earth. Louisa screamed, rushing up the stairs, but the ground swallowed him whole. The burned woman caught her arm. "It's done," she whispered. "The land has taken what it's owed." But Louisa's tears didn't stop. "Then why do I still hear her?" The woman looked toward the dark cellar, where the candlelight flickered one last time. "Because not all the roots have fed yet," she said. "And the land still remembers your name." To be continued in Part 10. Part 10, The Last Light of Willow Bend. Historic Horror, The Willow Bend Wager. Some stories don't end when the last soul dies. Some echo through the bloodline, whispering through the walls, breathing through the soil. At Willow Bend, the roots had fed, but the hunger wasn't gone. Because evil that's born in blood always remembers where it began. The storm raged for 3 days. By the time the clouds broke, half the plantation was underwater. The magnolia grove had fallen, great trees uprooted, their roots twisted like the bones of giants. The earth that had once hidden its sins now exposed them. The graves had opened. Louisa stood at the edge of the floodplain, her dress heavy with mud, her face streaked with rain and tears. The burned woman, the one who had come as a stranger, as a servant, as something else entirely, stood beside her, unmoving. Below them, the house leaned crookedly, half sunk into the soaked ground. One of the chimneys had collapsed. The parlor windows were shattered, the curtains inside fluttering like ghosts. Louisa whispered, "It's over now, isn't it?" The woman's voice was low, soft as ashes. "For your father, yes. For the land, not yet." Louisa turned to her, eyes fierce despite her exhaustion. "Then tell me what I have to do. Tell me how to end this for good." The woman looked out over the field, the flooded magnolias, the broken fences, the twisted roots. "You can't end it," she said. "But you can choose what grows from it." That night, Louisa lit every candle left in the house. Margaret slept in the upstairs room, her fever gone but her eyes still hollow, as if the sickness had taken more than her strength, as if it had stolen a piece of her soul. The air was heavy with silence. No frogs, no crickets, not even wind. The plantation had gone still, as if waiting. Louisa sat in her mother's old rocking chair, a journal open on her lap. Inside were pages of her father's handwriting, records of crops, accounts, shipments, and debts. And between them, hidden like rot under bark, she found a page her father had torn but not burned. It was a contract, dated nearly 40 years earlier. In exchange for wealth and harvest without blight, Samuel Hargrove Sr. offers 3 souls of the bloodline to the earth of Willow Bend. 3 souls. Louisa shuddered. Her grandfather. Her father. And who was left? Her hand shook as she looked toward the ceiling, where Margaret slept. The candle beside her flickered, then died. A cold draft moved through the room, though the windows were shut tight. From somewhere down the hall came the faint sound of a child laughing, soft, breathy, wrong. Louisa stood. "Who's there?" No answer. Just that same small laugh again, drifting closer. She followed it into the hallway, carrying her lantern. The walls seemed longer than before, stretching like a nightmare corridor. The family portraits stared down, their painted eyes glinting in the weak light. Then she saw movement, the shape of a small figure at the far end, hair wet, dress torn, skin pale as bone. The girl from the cellar. Louisa froze. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know what he did. I know what they took from you." The child tilted her head. Her voice was faint but clear. "He promised us light, but he gave us fire." "I can give you rest," Louisa said. "If you tell me how." The girl stepped closer, her bare feet leaving wet prints on the wood. "You can't free the land," she said. "But you can free me." "How?" "Blood for blood," the girl murmured. "The roots remember your name, Louisa Hargrove. They will not stop until the line ends where it began." Louisa's breath caught. "You want me to die?" The girl didn't answer, only turned and pointed toward the grove. The magnolia trees swayed though there was no wind. Louisa walked out into the night barefoot, her lantern guttering in the rain. The burned woman followed silently, her shawl dragging through the mud. "Is this what you wanted all along?" Louisa demanded. "To see me die, to see the family that owned you buried with its sins." The woman stopped. "I wanted the truth to live," she said. "But some truths demand sacrifice. You were born of their blood, Louisa, but you are not like them. That is why the land chose you." Louisa's tears mixed with the rain. "I don't understand." "You will," the woman said, her voice suddenly distant. "When the roots touch you, don't fight. Let them take what they're owed. Then maybe Willow Bend will sleep." The grove waited. Where her father had been dragged down, the soil still pulsed faintly, like a living thing breathing beneath the surface. Louisa knelt in the mud. "If this is what it takes," she whispered, "then take me." The earth shuddered. A low hum rose, not a sound, but a vibration deep in her bones. The roots stirred. They coiled around her wrists, her ankles, her waist, cold and slick, but not cruel. The pain was sharp, but behind it came warmth, like light pressing through darkness. The burned woman stood at the edge of the grove, whispering words Louisa didn't recognize, old, rhythmic, ancient. The ground opened. Louisa gasped. not in fear, but in release. She felt her heartbeat slow, her breath melt into the soil, her vision fill with light. Faces appeared, the children, her mother, even her father, drifting like lanterns through water. And then, nothing, only silence. When morning came, the grove was still again. The trees stood straight. The air smelled clean for the first time in decades. Margaret woke and called for her sister, but Louisa did not answer. Down by the magnolias, only one mark remained, a small mound of fresh earth and a cross made from 2 branches tied with ribbon. The burned woman was gone. Margaret found the journal days later and kept it hidden. She left Willow Bend soon after, taking nothing but the book and the memories she could not escape. The plantation stood empty for years, vines crawling through windows, walls caving, roots pushing through floorboards. And sometimes, travelers said, on quiet nights when the moon hung low, you could still see the candles burning in the old Hargrove house. And a girl standing by the window, her dress muddy, her hair tangled with magnolia blossoms, watching, waiting, whispering to the roots below. Call to action for narration or video ending. If you felt the chill of Willow Bend tonight, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more haunting tales buried in history. Leave a comment below, would you have had the courage to face the curse? New historic horror stories every week. Because the past never really dies. I Crescent Moon.